Hey, what's going on guys? Today we're going to be ranking all of the sacred seals in the game, which is a video that I have already done when the game actually first came out, but that video sucked, so we're going to do it again now that I have much more experience and much more knowledge in the game. Now do keep in mind that every single one of these seals does have a specific use, so don't really focus too hard on the ranking side of things, do focus more of what I am actually saying and highlighting what uses they actually do have. Because a majority of these seals do actually have a passive effect of which boosts the damage of specific types of spells, and you don't even have to use the seal to benefit off its passive effect. You can just have it in your offhand, and as long as it's equipped, you just benefit. So basically every single seal does actually have its specific use. Now the criteria is actually based on how well they perform, how many uses they have, and also how easy it is to acquire and level up. Also, there's going to be lots of numbers in this video, so if you don't know how to count, I'm sorry. Starting off right at the bottom, we have the Frenzied Flame Seal. Now getting into the good things about the seal, it does have scalings in 4 different stats: strength, dexterity, intelligence, and faith. It also doesn't have any requirements at all, which will be cool if it was like a staff, because staffs tend to have higher requirements, but for seals, they tend to be pretty low in general anyway. Also, this seal does boost your Frenzied Flame incantations by 20%, which is pretty nice. Now unfortunately, there is a plethora of terrible things about this spell. One, it is acquired later in the game of a very annoying questline that does actually lock you into a particular ending unless you do another person's questline, so it is very inconvenient to get. But the worst thing about it is that it has terrible damage and terrible incant scaling. The scalings of which you get in dexterity, strength, and intelligence are very poor, and that base scaling and faith doesn't really make up for it much as well. Now the unique thing about this seal itself is that it does actually have a dexterity scaling, which none of the other seals actually do. So if we were to spec into a dexterity type of build, at 40 dex and 20 faith, this seal does actually get 178 incant scaling, which is just not that good at all. For comparison, the finger seal, which is like the starting seal that you get in the game, at 30 faith does 188 incant scaling. And even if we were to go to higher levels at 60 dexterity and 60 faith, it gets 255 incant scaling at plus 10, but a finger seal at the exact same stats gets 286, and that doesn't even have a dexterity, intelligence, or strength scaling. And you might think that it has a decent quality scaling, but even then it was pretty poor at 60 strength, dexterity, and 20 faith. It ended up getting 232 total incant scaling. Something like the CLAWMARK seal at the exact same stats that doesn't even have a dexterity scaling gets 228, which is less, but being that it has a better strength scaling, you actually can two-hand it and it'll end up doing even more damage. And even at extremely high levels, if you had 80 points into strength, dexterity, faith, and intelligence, it gets an incant scaling of 373. The golden order seal, that only gets a faith and intelligence scaling, gets 390. So even at extremely high levels, it's still not even going to be the best seal. Now one thing that I haven't mentioned is that the B scaling in faith is actually going to be a detriment to a lot of type of faith builds, because your healing spells and your weapon buffs actually scale directly off your faith stat and your faith scaling. So being that this thing has a B scaling in faith, you're just not going to get as much benefit off your healing spells or your weapon buffs as much as you would with a seal that has an S scaling in faith. So its only use is just to have it in your offhand and probably use Frenzied Burst, and that's about it. Number 8, we have the Giant Seal. Now this is a faith-based seal that is acquired towards the end of the game. You actually get this one after every single other seal, basically at the mountaintop of the giants. It does have relatively low requirements, which is nice, and it does boost your Fire Monk and your Giant's Flame incantations by 20%. Unfortunately, this doesn't actually include Catch Flame, which is going to be like the best fire-based incantation. But the main reason this is going to get lower on a list is because compared to all of the other faith-based seals, it just gets the worst incant scaling. Just the worst one. And combined with the fact that it does require smithing stones means that it's going to be harder to upgrade, and the fact that you get it later in the game, the only use that it does really have is to just boost your Fire Monk and Fire Giant incantations. At number 7, we have the Gravel Stone Seal. Now this is another faith-based seal of which you can acquire at Landel, which is still relatively early on, but actually a lot later than some of the other seals of which you can get in the game. And this thing does actually also boost the Dragon Cult incantations by 15%, which is amazing because that includes things like Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike, Lightning Spear, and Frozen Lightning Spear, which are some of your best incantations in the entire game. However, this does not include Electrify Armament, which is actually disappointing. Now, unfortunately, it suffers from the same fates that the Giant Seal suffers from, in that compared to the other faith-based seals, it just gets less incant scaling and less damage in general. Now, it still gets a little bit higher than the Giant Seal, but compared to the GODSLAYER'S, Finger Seal, ERDTREE, it's just not going to be as good. This seal would be so much cooler if it actually had a dexterity scaling. I don't know why lightning weapons all have dexterity scalings, but this seal itself, which boosts the lightning incantations, doesn't get a dexterity scaling. Why not, From Software? You ruined it for us. So yeah, unfortunately the only use is to have it in your offhand to boost your lightning incantations. Number 6, we have the Finger Seal. Now this is another faith-based seal of which you can acquire right at the beginning of the game off the Finger Maiden, and it is going to be your starting seal until you actually can find a better one. In this instance, it's actually going to be until 27 faith until you actually meet the minimum requirements for the GODSLAYER seal. Now the fact that it's going to be your best early game seal is still extremely good because I recommend everybody going into at least a little bit of faith, roughly about 15, because you can get access to things like Flame Grimy Strength, some of the damage negation spells, Bestial Vitality as well. So you can just get all those things with almost every single type of build, and you can just throw on the Finger Seal and its benefit. At number 5, we have the ERDTREE seal. Now at this point onwards, literally all of these seals are extremely useful and you can use them almost all the time and you'll benefit greatly because it is that good. But with the ERDTREE seal specifically, this one actually does have the highest requirements out of all the seals at 40, which is still perfectly fine because this one you only really want to use it at higher levels anyway, because this one is actually going to end up being your best seal at 69 nice faith and onwards. Before that, you actually want to use the GODSLAYER seal. So being that you only really benefit at a much higher levels, it's going to be more of a new game plus type of seal. Unless you have like a pure faith build and done a lot of leveling in your playthrough, then maybe it's going to be a good end game option. Also, this seal doesn't boost any types of spells as well. Not sure why it doesn't boost the ERDTREE incantations. That's kind of unfortunate, but 69 faith and onwards, definitely use this one. Number 4, we have the CLAWMARK seal. Now this is going to be your strength and faith based seal, which you do get a B scaling in both at plus 25, which yes, is going to require smithing stones to upgrade, which I don't know why every single seal doesn't require somber stones because you can't infuse them. That makes no sense. This seal is actually acquired very early on off of Gorenk, does actually have very cheap requirements, does boost your bestial incantations by 10%, and being that it has a very good strength scaling, you can actually two-hand it to improve your strength scaling to just further boost your incant scaling. Now once again, being that this thing has a B scaling in faith, it's not going to be the best seal to pair alongside healing spells or your weapon buffs because they don't actually scale off incant scaling at all. It's just purely on how much faith scaling that you do have. But this seal is just absolutely amazing, even with a pure strength build, which is just ridiculous. The fact that you can just go all into strength and actually benefit off spell damage is just unheard of. But at 50 strength and 20 faith, you can get 222 incant scaling, which is nice. And at 40 faith with a finger seal, you can get 221. So the fact that you can just get literally more with this at very similar stat investments, and you can actually two-hand it to further boost the damage to 236. At 40 strength and 40 faith, you get 264 with the CLAWMARK seal, and obviously get that same 221 with the finger seal, and you get 280 when two-handed with a CLAWMARK seal. So it's obviously not going to be as much damage as like a pure faith build, but the fact that you can still get very meaningful damage out of this. Now, unfortunately, at higher levels, it's going to kind of fall off. It's not going to be the play at much higher levels. At 80 strength and faith, you get 318 incant scaling and 341 when two-handed. But the ERDTREE seal at that 80 faith gets 353. So once you add those higher levels, it's not going to really benefit as much. But almost all other types of strength builds is definitely going to benefit off using this seal right here. Number 3, we have the Golden Order seal. Now this is going to be your faith and intelligence based seal, and this seal just gets the highest incant scaling in the entire game. Pretty much early to mid game, and extremely late game. There are some like weird areas in between to where it's not going to be the best seal. But this seal does have relatively low requirements. You can actually upgrade it with somber stones, which is nice, and you can get it pretty early on at the Altus Plateau, which you can just go there without having to kill anything via the medallions. And this thing does actually also boost your Golden Order incantations by 10%, which would be nice if the Golden Order incantations were actually good, because outside of the Discus of Light, they're just kind of trash, let's be real. But to get into the numbers, at 25 faith and intelligence, it gets 227 incant scaling, whereas a GODSLAYER seal at 40 faith, which gets about 224, so it'll just be better in that regard. At 40 intelligence and faith, it gets 317 incant scaling, and a 70 faith ERDTREE seal gets 313. At 45 of both faith and intelligence, you get 338, but the ERDTREE seal at 80 faith does get you 353. So at this point onwards, it's kind of going to be better with the ERDTREE seal, which I was talking about. So like early mid game is better with the Golden Order. Once you get to like late game, then it's the ERDTREE, but then it picks back up again once it gets like 80 faith and 80 intelligence. Then obviously the Golden Order seal is going to be the much better option. You get 390 incant scaling compared to the ERDTREE seal at 99 faith. You get 367. Now, despite this seal actually outperforming almost every other seal in almost every single instance, it's still not going to get that much higher because, one, it's a faith and intelligence based seal, which there aren't many faith and intelligence based weapons in the game. In fact, there's only one, and there's no faith and intelligence infusion. And the fact that it doesn't get an S scaling in faith means that it's not going to be the best seal for your healing spells and your weapon buffs. And being that you have to level up your intelligence to benefit off this seal can be seen as a negative as well as a positive, because that means you're not going to really meet the minimum requirements for some of the spells as fast as you would like. But incantations tend to have lower requirements anyway. But being that you're going into more intelligence, you actually can use sorceries alongside with this if you wanted to. But if you did want to maximize your damage throughout spells, throughout your entire playthrough, this would literally be your best option. At number 2, we have the GODSLAYER'S seal. Now this is going to be your pure faith-based seal, of which you can acquire very early on in the game at Stormveil Castle. And this seal will just be used throughout the majority of the playthrough, because once you meet the minimum requirements of 27, it will just be the best seal to have until you actually end up getting to 69 faith, and then you switch to the ERDTREE seal. So if you're anywhere between those two levels, this is just the best seal to have, which honestly a majority of people using faith type builds are going to be around about this area as well. And combined with the fact that this thing does boost your Black Flame incantations by 10%, only helps because all the Black Flame incantations are actually really good. And being that it does get that S scaling in faith, is just going to be very well paired alongside healing type spells and your weapon buffs as well. It's just probably going to be the best option in that regard. At number 1, we have the Dragon Communion seal. Now this bad boy right here is probably the main reason as to why faith and arcane builds are probably just the best build type in the entire game, because you can literally just have an arcane build and get extremely good spell damage. And not just like good spell damage, I mean probably better spell damage than you could with a regular faith build, which is just insane. Now with this B scaling in faith and S scaling in arcane, the Dragon Communion seal actually gets pretty comparable incan scaling to the Golden Order seal. Now at 30 faith and 60 arcane, you get 333 incan scaling. Now with the Golden Order seal at 45 intelligence and faith, you get 338. So it is roughly about the same. So the fact that it actually gets the second highest incan scaling and gets an arcane scaling as well is just absolutely ridiculous. But there are a couple of reasons as to why I do prefer the Dragon Communion seal over the Golden Order seal. And that's one, you get it right at the beginning of the game, it gets insanely cheap requirements, and it gets an arcane scaling. So therefore, it pairs extremely well with arcane weapons, which are probably some of the best weapons in the entire game. And it actually does boost your bleed type incantations and your madness incantations to make them proc the status effects even quicker. Let's not forget that the Dragon Communion seal also boosts your dragon incantations by 15%, and dragon incantations are probably just some of the best, or probably the best spell type in the entire game, because every single one is just amazing and they just melt everything in the entire game. But getting into the damage numbers, at 25 faith and arcane, you get 226 incan scaling with the Dragon Communion seal, a 40 faith GODSLAYER seal gets you 224. So even at around about that level, Dragon Communion seals is going to be the best in terms of damage. Now let's say you had a primary arcane build, so you had about 60 arcane and you probably want 20 faith for a little bit of spells in terms of the requirements. You have 306 incan scaling with the Dragon Communion seal. And if you have a 70 faith ERDTREE seal, you have 305 incan scaling. So even against the ERDTREE seal, it is still out damages it. But if you were to go with this type of build, I would actually recommend going in at about 30 faith, which you can just use the faith tier, give you plus 10 to faith, boost your incan scaling to 333, and that way you actually have the minimum requirements of things like Golden Vow, Ancient Dragons, Lightning Strike, and you can just destroy the entire game with insane spell damage. And you can pair it alongside your occult-infused bleed weapon and just bleed everything out in the entire game, and you probably have just the best build. Like, it's just honestly insane. This seal is just incredible. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this one. If you do want to see a ranking of the staffs video, definitely let me know down in the comments. As always, please do like and subscribe, and do follow me on Twitch because I am live there every single day, doing a bunch of challenge runs and random stuff as well relating to the Souls games. But yeah, see you in the next one, guys. Bye.